The process for this evening will be to ask several questions. We have 6 altogether. There are 2 questions out of each category. And the first category is personal spiritual life. So the first question is, in this process of discernment and call to the Sacred Order of Bishop, what has been most gratifying and enlightening to you? And do you have a personal spiritual director?
I'm going to look at the question
Absolutely.
Because that helps me. Right. So in the process of discernment and call, I think the most gratifying thing to me has been the process of being in prayer and conversation and discernment with other people. Because for something like this is not something one embarks on alone. So I've been surrounded in prayer by people that I know and love and trust. I've been in deep conversation with them, and I felt really supported and affirmed by them. So that part has been extremely gratifying. And I think the part that has been most enlightening to me really was first reading your profile and looking at it and finding that it really spoke to me. That when I read about you, I have that feeling people I imagine have when they read eHarmony profiles and go, ooh, is this really too good to be true? Because I've looked at other profiles when people have asked me to, and some of them are lovely for someone else. But this one spoke to me, and on a very deep level, and made me want to get to know more about you. So the fact that I've had the opportunity to talk with the people on the search committee and then come out for the bishop's discernment retreat and then to finally be here and to come out and meet the people in the wider part of the Diocese of Arizona and to go to the different locations to me is really like bringing something that has been a wonderful hope and a promise on paper into something that is really alive and thriving and embodied and is in people that I get to finally meet and learn to know. And hopefully one day learn to love. So I think that's been the enlightening part for me, is finding out it really might be as good as it sounds. And I find that extremely encouraging, that you are people who are able in the best possible way to tell the truths about yourself. So I think your profile really captures not only who you are, but who you hope to be. And the idea that you are willing to be that open and honest and vulnerable and hopeful is, to me, a wonderful thing. And also asking, do I have a personal spiritual director? Yes, I do. I have a wonderful spiritual director. I'll put in a plug right now for Jim Kreischer, who is the founder and director of the Spiritual Renewal Center in Syracuse, New York. And he is a Roman Catholic layman, and he's run this center, which is ecumenical, for 40 years. They just had their 40th anniversary about 6 weeks ago. And he is a kind, gentle, thoughtful, insightful, and really good-humored man. And I found that with him, I'm able to be open, vulnerable, able to listen. He's been extremely helpful to me. But I will put the caveat in here that really the first person that, well, in my process of spiritual direction, the first thing I have to practice doing is to be able to be my real self with God. Because even though I think we all know that God knows us anyway, the practice for me of being open and honest and willing to hear what I may or may not really want to hear, or go where I may or may not really want to go, comes from a practice of being open and receptive to God. And then the next step for me after that is to do the same with my husband, David, who has been with me, well, we've been married 31 years, but together longer than that, probably 33, because we met at Yale Divinity School, coffee hour, during the break for Old Testament class. And I know it has all those earmarks of romance. But But we met there, and we figured if we could get through divinity school and 2 children and 31 years of marriage, and I will come to him and say, all right, I just need to say it. You know, the thing that is in my heart or in my mind. And the amazing thing is, no matter what it is or how troublesome or how trivial or whatever it might be that's in my heart and mind that I feel like I'm carrying around, he still loves me when I'm done. And that to me is miraculous. And what it shows me is that I can trust God for that. I can trust my husband for that. I've learned to trust my spiritual director, Jim, with that. And I've learned to trust a wider circle of people with some, caution and appropriate boundaries and discernment, to be hopefully my best, most authentic, open self, and to invite you to do the same with me. And I think that in a process like this, where we want to find the right person to be the next bishop of Arizona, you want to be able to engage with someone who can be their best, most honest, open selves, and that you in turn feel you can offer that as well. Because I don't want to just see your polished self. I want to see your real self. Because that's where we are able to see Christ in one another and to respond to that presence. And to go from that place with God's help to be of service to the world in a place where, and that's just really not what you see on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. I mean, this is without the filters and without all the likes and without all the other accoutrements you get when one is presenting the polished self, but being our real Christ-like, honest selves with one another, and hoping that God will show us if this is the right fit for us to be together.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. As part of the moderator's job, I'm supposed to be the timekeeper as well. And so in doing that, just occurred to me that if we could just take 5 or 10 seconds after each answer so that you can
so that I can have a drink of water. I'll have my Marco Rubio moment.
Yes. What is your personal approach to stewardship of time, talent, and treasure?
Thank you. My personal approach to stewardship of time, talent, and treasure is to start what for me is the foundational truth that all that we have and all that we are is a gift from God. And stewardship is everything we do in response to that truth. So, considering that our lives, the people we love, the beauty of creation, the time we have together, all our gifts and talents, all our capabilities and skills are gifts from God. What we do with those is stewardship, because we are stewarding or caring for something that does not belong to us. It's a gift which we are given to hold lightly and to care for thoughtfully and to offer as a gift. So stewardship of time means asking myself that important question of how do I use the time that I am given? And I think everyone asks themselves that question after some big horrible thing happens and we re-examine our lives for a good 10 minutes. And then often go back to our usual daily schedule. But stewardship asks us to make a shift in our way of being and to ask ourselves, as Mary Oliver does, what are you going to do with this one wild and precious life? And when you look at it that way, just going through the daily motions on the hamster wheel doesn't suffice. So we need to look at offering ourselves and our time in thanksgiving to God and in service to others. Now, sometimes we're fortunate to have our work be our vocation, that we can use our gifts and talents and skills in wherever it is that we work, whether it's paid or volunteer or whatever capacity it might be. Whether we're at home with small children or we're retired and volunteering or we have a paying job. For many people, they need a job to pay the bills, and the way they're going to offer their gifts and skills may be something else. And that works too. But we need to be thoughtful about it, both as a part of the church community, but also throughout our whole lives. So that's our time. It's when we look at our calendar and say, so where did I use that time this week? Is that where I wanted to use it? Is that where I feel called to use it? And do I want to make some changes there? And our talent is, again, looking at what we've been given. And Madeleine L'Engle says something like, we can't take credit for our own talents. It's how we use them that counts. So it's not that we don't work hard at some of the things we learn to do well. For those of you who are bilingual or trilingual, I imagine you worked at that. For those of you who play a musical instrument or learn to be an architect or a lawyer or something, you worked at that. But you use the innate gifts and talents that God gave you and the time you were provided in order to be able to do those things. So we have to ask how we can offer those in service and in thanksgiving for what we have been given. And fortunately, the world and the church has an abundance of ways we can do that. So we can look at ministries in the church, we can look at ways we offer it in the community, we can look at ordained as well as lay ministries. Whether that means being a deacon, who's that wonderful bridge between the church and the world, or a priest, or a bishop, or a lay person who might have a specialized lay ministry, music ministry, youth ministry, whether they're a Eucharistic minister or a lay preacher or a Eucharistic visitor, there are all kinds of ways that one might have a gift to offer. And then there's our treasure. And treasure can be a lot of things, but usually in our culture, it's a nice euphemism for money. I learned to be unafraid of getting up in the pulpit and talking about money because it wasn't going to solve itself. So we went from having a $477,000 debt when I got there and no plan to pay for it, to having a capital campaign that was 28% over what we hoped to get, and raising stewardship by 22% in 5 years, and reducing our debt to less than $150,000. And that doesn't happen when you don't talk about money. So we had to learn to look at money as something that comes both from our time and our talent. And yes, we earn it, but because of the gifts and the time we're given by God. And our response in the biblical standard is to tithe, which means 10%. And people think, whoa, 10%, that's pretty scary. Is that net or gross? I don't care whether you go net or gross. Let's go for 10%. But let's start with where you are, because really, what else can you do? You have to start with where you are. And if you go and look at your checkbook or your debit card or whatever mechanism you use, and you say, here's what I earn in a year. How much did I give to the church? And if you're like most good Episcopalians, it's 2%. So if you go and you find that's where you are, you're average. But what does that mean? We have room for growth. So in what we call proportional giving, it means you look at that and you go, you know, maybe this year I could do 3%. Or maybe this year I could do 4%. Or maybe I could do a 3.5 because I'm not quite there, but I can take a step. And we can work our way closer to being able to tithe, to being able to respond generously as God has given generously. So I think stewardship in the sense of being aware, of being grateful and joyful and generous, and realizing that we're giving back a small fraction of all that we have been given is a wonderful grounding.
Thank you. Now you only get 2 seconds for a break.
It's all right.
The next section is on the Diocesan Life. And this is the first question. What do you see as the primary mission of the Episcopal Church, and how do you imagine leading us into living out that vision in the diocese?
I see the primary mission of the Episcopal Church as being to proclaim and embody and share the love of God as we experience it in Jesus Christ. So I know the prayer book says that the mission of the church itself is to reconcile all people to unity through Christ Jesus. And I think that we are agents of that mission, and how every diocese and every parish and how every person participates in that can be a little different according to our various gifts and skills. But I think in the diocese, one of the things we want to do in the Diocese of Arizona is figure out together how it is that God is calling us to participate in this mission of showing and sharing and embodying the love of God in Jesus Christ, wherever it is that we find ourselves. So as a diocese, what I would want to do with you is to have a discernment process where we pray and have conversations and spend time together actively listening and discerning what it is that God might be calling us into as the way this diocese should embody the love of Christ and express that so that other people can experience it. So I know that lots of dioceses go through this, we're going to craft a new and fabulous mission statement. Well, that's a lovely thing, but it's not just about having a mission statement, because we can come up with those with a branding opportunity in short order. But if you really want a discernment opportunity where we ask where it is and how it is that God would have us live into this call, then we need to spend a little time together asking where God is calling us together and what that would look like. So it takes a lot of courage to say, all right, I'm going to be open. What would you have me do? So I think that for the Episcopal Church in the Diocese of Arizona, it is being responsive to that call to God to say, how would you like us to embody your love in this place? And I would hope that every parish would be asking that question on an ongoing basis, and every person would be asking that question in an ongoing basis. Because I can say that how Gil might be called to live out that would be very different than how Roger might be called to live out that. Because they're different people. But together, like Paul says, with all the parts of the body of Christ, we can live out the call of being a diocese that embodies the love of God in a way that can show Arizona that this is not some just lovely Bible story or abstract concept, but real, tangible, personal experiences of loving care.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Every congregation wants to grow in numbers and spiritual depth, and all want more children and youth. What role does the bishop have in supporting those aspirations?
Yes, every parish wants to grow in numbers and spiritual depth. Actually, I'm not so sure that's true. I visited some that are very happy the way they are. Not saying that's happened here. Unless, of course, it's going to grow with other people who look just like us and agree with all the same things we do. So I think one of the roles of the bishop is to be honest in assessing whether or not everyone really does want to grow in numbers and spiritual depth, or whether we're really just kind of comfortable the way we are. Because I think one of the most important things for the church is to get out of our comfort zone, to move beyond the idea that we are a club instead of a community. And a community that is not simply inward focused. To think of ourselves as people who come together for worship and prayer and the building up of community so that we go out into the world and are empowered to share the love and the presence of Jesus Christ. Because if what we're doing is coming together for some lovely, aesthetically pleasing worship that is done decently and in good order with stunning music and acolytes that know exactly what they're doing and when they're supposed to do it, and clergy that preach profound sermons. And then we do nothing with that besides bask in it. We're not doing what we're called to do. We're having a wonderful moment for ourselves. But that is supposed to empower us to go out into the world and carry forth the love and the mission of God. And it's also supposed to encourage us to learn to be hospitable and invitational so that people feel free to come in. So we can't simply wait for those people to wander in. I mean, it's wonderful to be welcoming, but if you're thinking we'll be very welcoming to those people, those random passersby who might happen to come in off the street to visit our church today, that isn't being invitational. Jesus is the one who went out and around and invited people to follow him. And we need to learn to do those same things. Now, it might not look the same way Jesus did it, because I'm not the person who goes around and goes, "Hi, I'm Dina and I love Jesus. Would you like to come with me?" But we can learn to do it in our own way. One thing I ask people is, if I told you that I was looking for a good restaurant, how many of you would be able to give me a recommendation right away? Right? Would you be shy about that?
No.
You don't really know me, but you wouldn't be shy about that, right? Or what about a good movie? Who's seen a good movie lately? Right. We're comfortable talking about those things. But as Episcopalians, we need to learn step by step to be comfortable inviting people into relationship with Jesus. And sometimes that simply begins by inviting people into relationship with us. Sometimes the best door into the church with the big C is the back door. It's the, "Would you like to come to our first Friday dinner with me? Would your kids like to come to the youth group with my kids? We're having a great organ concert. We're having a play." We actually had a great play at our church called Fish Eyes. It was a comedy on the gospel. It was fabulous. I was able to encourage our congregation because they can invite their friends to a something and not just church, right? We had people jammed basically with a shoehorn into our parish hall to come watch this comedy about the gospel put on by two men. And it went so well, we're doing a sequel. So it wasn't just this random, like, I feel really awkward because I learned that my faith is personal and private. I'm not supposed to talk about that in public, and I'm not a fundy, and this feels really weird, right? To go up and talk to people about faith and church and Jesus. But boy, I could invite you to an event at my parish. And once you know that we're really good people, then I could say, "Would you like to come to church on Sunday with me?" Now that you've learned that we're a welcoming bunch. So little steps, but they work to learn to be invitational and gracious and to welcome people into loving community. And then to also welcome them into faith and perhaps even welcome them into baptism.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have 2 questions left.
Happy day.
The church and the world. How do you envision providing leadership to congregations and members of the diocese on matters of social justice, including systemic and structural forces that perpetuate injustice? And what relevant experiences do you bring to those issues?
In the Diocese of Central New York, I am the co-founder and chair of the anti-racism team. When I first moved to the diocese 8.5 years ago, I was dismayed to learn that although General Convention had passed a resolution telling everyone that we needed to have all of our leaders in every parish go through anti-racism training, that had yet to happen 14 years later. And when that doesn't happen, that conveys a huge message by its absence. And this was clearly not only not a priority, but a huge point of discomfort and avoidance. And people would say, "Well, we don't need to do that because we hardly have any Black people in our churches." Well, I wonder why that might be. So I had a conversation with a colleague, and he and I talked about this, and he found out I had anti-racism trainer training from the Diocese of Michigan, which we had when we elected Wendell Gibbs, one of the few Black diocesan bishops. And I went to the training sessions. And so my colleague, Peter, and I talked about this and said, well, clearly no one else is going to do something about this, and someone needs to. So we will. So Peter paid to go get his own training, and he came back, and at Diocesan Ministry Fair, we offered a workshop on anti-racism. And we figured, ooh, if we're really lucky, we'll get 20 people. This would be great. We could, make a start. We had 60 people. We were thrilled. We had 60 people. And of course, Peter stood up and said, so here we have a white woman and a gay man. We don't exactly mirror what an anti-racism team should look like, but we're a start. Who would like to join us? So we began with the two of us. We gathered a team from the people who came that first day. And we partnered up with our diocese next door, the Diocese of Rochester, and they helped show us how to run a training session. And so we ran our first training session in the Diocese of Central New York in the fall, and we had 60 people sign up for the first day. We were delighted. And then, because I can be creative about how we manage to do some of the things we need to do, and I was in charge of clergy continuing ed on the Commission on Ministry, guess what our next clergy day was? Anti-racism training. We had 80% of our clergy all trained in one day. So that was a wonderful thing. And since then, we've had anti-racism training in every geographical area of the entire diocese. And we're moving on to learn how to be part of the beloved community, to move into dismantling racism. We are working with the Absalom Jones Center. All kinds of wonderful things. We're planning a pilgrimage for next year. We've had great opportunities in that regard. And with anti-racism, we are also looking at other communities where people have been left out, disenfranchised, underrepresented. Part of that work I do as the chair of the Commission on Ministry when we're looking at who is underrepresented in terms of faith communities and leadership. So we have a large Sudanese population, and we've been raising up and affirming Mother Amour, who was just ordained to the priesthood about 2 years ago through her congregation. So she's Sudanese, and they have particular needs because they speak Dinka. And so they need materials that are available in Dinka and in English. We've had a few attempts at Spanish-speaking congregations, but in our part of the country, people are extremely reluctant to come because folks are on the lookout for them should they gather in a space so they can round them up and ship them out. Although our daughter helped with one service over in Skinny Atlas for a while when they had one there, neighboring community. So we're continually looking to find those who are sort of the least, the lost, the left out, and to build up and find ways to include them.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have a couple of minutes left for the last one. Being aware that this is a deeply divided time in this country, what experiences do you have in peace building and conflict resolution and creating common ground?
When I came to Christ Church in Central New York, I found a congregation that was extremely conflict averse. Now, knowing most Episcopalians are not out there wanting to play roller derby at the vestry meeting, I didn't think it was too unusual to be somewhat conflict averse, but this was really quite notable and made me wonder what was going on, that even just usual topics we might disagree on, people would just shut down. So what I discovered is that 2 rectors before me, there had been a gentleman whose habit or practice it was to be the rector in a manner that was very authoritarian and harsh. And he had a reputation for screaming at people in public. And then going to the secretary and dictating a letter, pointing out the highlights of the discussion that they had just had, and sending it to the person so they could remember exactly why they had just been screamed at in public. And this had been deeply traumatic for them. So they avoided any conflict, especially with the priest, but also with each other. And they had had a parish split They had lost a lot of congregation members over this, and the parish had dwindled quite a bit. And even though he had left years before, so there had been another priest there for 7 years. There had been a 2-year interim, another priest for 7 years, an interim after him, and then me. They spoke about the rector in between as if he'd merely been an interim, and the other man had just left. It had been 15 years. And so I realized one of the most important things I could do was build relationship and trust with them, because we couldn't build much of anything else together without relationship and trust. So after we got through the major financial hair-on-fire fiscal crisis, they realized I was not going to ditch and run, that they could trust me to stay, even when things weren't good. And from there, they learned that they could trust me in other ways. So when I did my doctoral program, I used that opportunity creatively because I was given this lovely instruction in one of my classes that I was required to preach a prophetic sermon. Oh, one did not do this at Christ Church. So I got up and I explained nicely that I was required to do this for my doctoral program. They were all hugely supportive of the doctoral program, which was a lovely thing. And then I was going to preach, and what it meant was I was going to have to preach about controversial things, so that they were prepared. They knew this was coming. And that I would give them a survey afterwards, so they would be able to give me some constructive feedback. So I used the text, liturgically appropriate according to the lectionary, so I scheduled it, on Bartimaeus, where Bartimaeus is there saying, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, a sinner." And if you remember, he gets shushed, right? Repeatedly shushed. And it's just one of those Bible stories we sort of kind of know. So one of the things that I pointed out to people is we often don't realize in Bible stories there's a political point here. He was getting shushed not simply because he was pesky and annoying, although he does come across as pesky and annoying, but because he was proclaiming Jesus the King, the Son of David the King, the rightful King, instead of Caesar in a Roman-occupied Jerusalem surrounded by Roman soldiers. This was really politically risky. So it was multi-layered in the reason why they shushed him. And I said, often we miss in Bible stories the political import of what's going on because to us it's just a Bible story. We don't know the background for that. So I went through and talked about different portions where things are very political and we kind of just wash right over it. And I said, so Jesus expects us to talk about the political things because Jesus does. We don't get a pass on that. Even if it's difficult, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it's risky, we still need to do that in a biblically grounded, thoughtful, prayerful way. We need to do this. So I want to ask you, why aren't we doing this? Because I think we need to. So what is it that we can and can't talk about? So I handed out the survey with a whole list of things. Which of these can we talk about? And much to my amazement, it came back and said, we can talk about anything you want to, as long as it's done in a way, as I said, according to our baptismal vows, where we respect the dignity of every human being. 2 minutes?
Sorry, no.
I don't even have to.
Thank you.
We ended up having a series of conversations about such topics and developing prayer and action opportunities out of that. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
So the first question is, on your personal spiritual life, you can have that.
All right, I'm going to stand up too because I can't see you well.
In this process of discernment and call to the Sacred Order of Bishop, what has been most gratifying and enlightening to you? And do you have a personal spiritual director?
So a couple things happened to me that really stood out in the discernment of this call to the bishop, which is that when I was writing the essay questions, and you required a lot of essays. I don't know when the last time I wrote 6,000 words about anything was. But as I was writing one of them, I remember that I lost track of time and I missed an appointment. Very unusual for me that I miss an appointment. I'm very reliable. But also, I realized I couldn't remember the last time I was writing something and lost track of time, because I was so invested and so excited about writing it. And I kind of thought, wow, what does that mean? What is God doing there? And then the second moment that was really both gratifying and affirming, but also sort of moved me along in the process, was at the retreat with the search committee. They had us each do a liturgy, and they said, you have 20 minutes. This is the time of day. This is the day. You can do anything you want for 20 minutes. I'm an Episcopalian. I like structure. I like being told what to do. But so I preached. I mean, we did a prayer service. I sang a song with people because I'm a musician and I love to sing. And so I taught everybody a song. And then I preached. And I preached in both English and Spanish. And as I was preaching, I just saw that people were leaning forward and they were nodding. And I just had that sort of gut sense of, wait a second, these could be my people, and I could be their bishop. And that was, I have these sort of, in all of my discernment through my life, I've had these sort of moments of clarity. And that was the moment for me when it switched between, well, I'm putting my name in here. It's never going to happen. I'm not going to invest myself in it because I don't want to set myself up to get disappointed. And, I'm just going to, this is going to be a great learning experience. And it went from that to really feeling like, I think I may actually be called to this ministry. And I think I might have the gifts that they need. And I think God might actually help me do this. And that was a really significant shift. But like I said, those are the moments of clarity. In my discernment for becoming a priest, the moment was I was at Shakespeare and Company in the Berkshires. It's an acting training program. It was the summer between my junior and senior years in college. And I was, planning to be an actor. And I was, I'd had a lot of people say, have you thought about being a priest? But I was going to do that after I was a famous actress. We had this amazing lecture by Tina Packer, who was the director of Shakespeare and Company, about the origins of theater. And she took the origins of theater back to, the ritual to make the sun rise or reenacting the woolly mammoth hunt or whatever. She took theater back to religion. And I sat there and realized that all the reasons that I loved acting, the sort of the visceral connection with people, the telling the story and that all of those were contained in the priesthood, but it would be real. And everybody else in that room walked out saying, I'm going to go worship at the theater. And I walked out of there going, I'm going to be a priest. And so I'm used to that kind of sort of moment of clarity and discernment of call. So that was very exciting in this process of the bishop search. And do I have a personal spiritual director? My Facebook feed today, the This Day in History, it was 3 years ago today that my longtime spiritual director, Sister Mary Christabel, died. She was an associate of the community. She was a sister at the Community of the Holy Spirit, and had been my spiritual director through through seminary and after. I don't have an individual spiritual director right now. I have a spiritual director that I can go to when I need to. He's a brother at Order of the Holy Cross, and he had been my spiritual director when I was out in California as a priest, and his, now that he's in the New York house, we meet whenever I need to. I have a confessor who I can go to when I need to make a confession, because my brother Robert is a lay brother, so he can't hear my confession. But what I practice in terms of spiritual direction really is I'm part of a group Bible study with some other female clergy who are, it really is, it's group spiritual direction, and many of them are legitimate spiritual directors. I'm not, but some of them actually have shingles out, that say spiritual director. And we gather every month, and we catch up with one another, we reflect on our lives and our prayer and our ministry, and then we go through the upcoming month of Bible lessons for preaching and discuss those. And that is really the place where, where I can bring things like this and say, hey, what do you think? What wisdom do you have? What do you think the Spirit is doing here? And reflect with them. So I have more of a group practice than an individual practice right now.
Thank you. Okay, the next question. What is your personal approach to stewardship of time, talent, and treasure?
So I think I kind of answered the time question in the plenary session, that I have a balanced life, and I have to have that for my own sanity and for my ministry. On those days when you're saying like, wait, I didn't get my day off this week and I'm not getting my day off next week, that's not okay. I feel it and I fix it, and I will say, all right, not going to that. They can take care of themselves. And that is understood within the context of when someone dies, you're there. When there's an emergency, you show up. It doesn't matter that I have a day off if someone is dying. But so I am pretty good at being a steward of my time. Stewardship of talent. So I would say about my talents, I'm a generalist. I have a lot of useful knowledge about a lot of topics, but I'm not like the pastoral care person. I am not the congregational development person. I am not the stewardship person. I am not the justice person. I'm somebody who loves doing all of those, and I would miss the inability to do any of them. And I think one of the things that interests me about being the Bishop of Arizona is that I think for the size of your diocese, you require a bishop who is a generalist, right? In my diocese, we have 3 bishops. They split the ministry between them so that they can each kind of have a focus or whatever. But your diocese needs a bishop who can do and shepherd kind of all the stuff and keep all the plates spinning at the same time and, go work with a congregation that's in conflict. And then you leave that and you go deal with, a clergy discipline issue. And then you get to go do a parish visitation to a healthy parish and confirm people and feel like, oh, the Spirit is really at work here. And then you go to, a standing committee meeting or something, or, but so you have to be able to do all of those things. And I think my stewardship of talent is that sort of broad knowledge base and the enjoyment in kind of being able to do a lot of things pretty well. And then stewardship of treasure, I tithe. I think that's a good basis, and I hope that clergy tithe as well. I hope that parishioners tithe as well. I know that's hard. I know that in my parish, which is on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where salaries are really big, people, when they do the math, they go, wait, that's a lot of money. I go, yes, it is. And so we work with that. I may have some parishioners who tithe, but it's not the wealthy ones. Poor people tithe. Poor people get it. Rich people have trouble with it. So, we've been working in our congregation with New Consecration Sunday as a stewardship program. We've done it for 2 years. The first year it was really effective. The second year, not so much. It talks about proportional giving. It encourages people to take one step forward, from what percent you're giving now to 1% more. So and it encourages people to really do the math of that. We found that helpful to increase, annual giving. I don't have a magic bullet for stewardship. As your bishop, I would be wanting to work with the people who are doing stewardship in your diocese, and I model it in my own life. And I pray and trust that my modeling it is compelling to the people who see it. And I think the bishop's stewardship is a way of encouraging the ministries of the diocese, right? The bishop has got to be one of the largest donors to every big diocesan ministry because you're responsible for it and you need to show people that way. And I would, hope to do that as a bishop in a different way than you do as rector of a parish. Okay, great.
Thank you. The next section is on the Diocesan Life. What do you see as the primary mission of the Episcopal Church, and how do you imagine leading us into living out that vision in the diocese?
So this is another one of those questions where I kind of go, well, I would not want to be the bishop and say, I'm going to lead you into my vision. I don't know what exactly God has in store for the Diocese of Arizona because we haven't we haven't gotten to that part in our relationship yet. I think the way that I would begin that discernment of what our collective vision and mission is that what I have heard in talking to people is there's a sense of how do we really unify the diocese? How do we get the people in Flagstaff and Lake Havasu and Tucson and Nogales and Phoenix to all feel equally part of the diocese and that their church matters and that their ministry matters? And I'm not sure of exactly how to do that. I mean, I've certainly explored with, some other dioceses what they're doing. In our diocese, we used to have, regions, and there was a regional office, and there were people who were in charge of different regions. And, we had a power swing from all the power being in Manhattan parishes to all the power being in the upstate parishes. And, now the pendulum's swinging back. It's hard to do that. I know there are dioceses that are exploring regional canons, and having sort of different ways because, it's a lot of square mileage. One thing that my current bishop did when he became bishop that I thought was really excellent in getting us to know the diocese and getting us to understand our diocese better is he created for us an indaba. An indaba is I think it's a Zulu word that, is about sort of sitting with people and getting to know them. And it's a process that was done around the Anglican Communion after Gene Robinson's election, where different dioceses around the church would have a team of, I think it was 8 people, and be matched with 3, so they would match 3 dioceses together around the Anglican Communion from different provinces so that they could meet together and get to know one another. And so our diocese, we were matched up with a diocese in England and a diocese in India. And so the people from India and England came and spent 2 weeks, I think, in New York. And then the people from New York and England went and spent 2 weeks in India. And the people from England and the US then spent 2 weeks in India. What you got it. And so based upon that experience that people had, he did a diocesan indaba. And kind of like Arizona, New York is a big diocese and is very diverse. I mean, it's Staten Island, Manhattan, the Bronx, and then Orange, Ulster, Putnam, Sullivan, and Westchester counties. So we have a big rural and migrant ministry program because we have places that are complete farmland. And obviously we have urban places and we have suburban places. And so they matched us up in groups of 3 parishes and tried to make us balance. So my parish, which is a sort of medium-sized church on the Upper East Side, but it's the Upper East Side, was matched with the Church of the Mediator in the Bronx, which is a historic African-American church that is now a Spanish-speaking church. And then then our third partner was St. Margaret's in Stottsburg, which is this little tiny gem of a parish that was a family chapel way, 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 way up the Hudson. And so, and this was going on all over the diocese. And so he created 3 weekends over the course of a program year where teams of 4, including the rector in each case, went and spent the weekend, all day Saturday, Saturday night, and Sunday in each other's parishes and got to know one another. And it was really interesting because what we discovered was that even though we were radically different parishes in terms of size, in terms of wealth, in terms of language, we had almost exactly the same issues. Every one of us had a building that was really old and that was built by a bunch of rich people who aren't Episcopalians anymore. Every one of us had some really exciting outreach ministries. And every one of us really discovered that we loved each other and that the differences that we felt that first time, kind of fell away as the year went on. And I don't know if that is a process that is appropriate for the Diocese of Arizona because I haven't talked to you about it. But something like that, where people actually get to spend time in each other's parishes and appreciate both our similarities and our differences, sounds like a really good way to figure out what the vision and mission of the diocese is and what plan God has for us all.
Thank you. I'm going to take a drink.
Oh, I would love to take a drink.
Every congregation wants to grow in numbers and spiritual depth, and all want more children and youth. What role does the bishop have in supporting those aspirations?
So growth is good. I was at a lecture it was a gathering of some people for the Consortium of Endowed Episcopal Parishes trying to figure out what their mission is. And we had a speaker. Who's the dean of Berkeley Div School at Yale now? Andrew McGowan, that's his name? Oh God, it's being videotaped too. Anyway, he said, to remember that what is good about the Episcopal Church right now is really good in terms of our growth in some places. And what is bad about the Episcopal Church is really bad. And not to try to just sort of mush it all together and just say, well, hey, some places are growing and some places aren't, and it's all the same. And now we're all kind of in the middle. Everyone does want to grow. And everyone has, I think, the capacity to grow, particularly in a state like Arizona, where demographically you are gifted and people are actually moving here. There are places in the United States where there are churches that need to die, because there aren't people there anymore to support them. I don't think Arizona is necessarily a place like that. Arizona is a place where things can grow and thrive. And to grow in numbers, you need to be evangelists, and you have to actually get out into the communities. You need to remember that the church exists not for the benefit of its members, but for the people outside of it. That's a William Temple quote. It's the only institution that exists for people who are not its members. And so you need to figure out how you are known in your community and how your community knows you. What do they see you doing? In my essays, I referenced this video about this sort of crazy dancing guy, and then another guy comes and joins him at a rock concert until everybody who's watching the rock concert is dancing. And it makes the point that people don't follow the leader, people follow the followers. So what are the followers doing? Because people will follow you. So your rector can do all sorts of cool things, but if you're not doing it and following, nobody will know how to follow. So it is up to the members to be outside of the church, publicly being Christians. In terms of everybody wanting more children and youth, yeah, great. Children and youth are awesome. In Arizona, I think the first question is, who lives in this neighborhood? Because there are places where you probably don't have children and youth in your neighborhood. And if you don't have children and youth in your neighborhood, just take a deep breath and become evangelists to grown-ups. You don't have to force that. Be who you are. Now, if you are in a neighborhood that has children and youth, then yeah, you've got to figure out how to welcome them. I think something that's most important, think about welcoming children and youth, you really need to welcome parents. As the parent of a 9-year-old now, I remember just that sheer mortification of being in church with a baby or a toddler who's screaming and making noise and banging his trucks around and whatever. And, you need to have a tolerance for that and to enjoy the noise of the Spirit, because those children are not the future of the church. They are the church. If they're baptized, they are every bit as member of the church as every one of us. And so they are the church, and it is their church. One of my, Nathan asked me one day, we were down in the parish hall, and he said, "Mommy, do you own the church?" Teaching moment. And I said, "Well, no." And I thought, though it feels like it some days. I said, we all own the church. And he said, "You mean I own the church?" I said, "Yeah, you own the church." And he just had this face. It was kind of like, I own a church. And so, how do we cultivate in children that sense of ownership of this is their church? They have ministry here. What are the opportunities for children to do ministry? Not for children to, not for the youth group to serve the parish dinner because we need somebody to serve the parish dinner and the youth group are available. But youth to do ministry for themselves, for their own building up. How do we create opportunities for children to do ministry in the liturgy? Children as readers, children as acolytes. I always have, if I have a senior who's graduating, I'll let him or her preach, one Sunday, because they have something to offer the church. And as for what role the bishop has in supporting those aspirations, I think first of all, the bishop has to be able to talk with kids. The bishop has to be able to preach in ways that are engaging to young people and to people of all generations. You're the bishop of all the people, which means you need to be able to go to the nursing home and you need to be able to go to the preschool VBS. And maybe you work with, one of the things that I love, we have an acolyte festival in the Diocese of New York. And one of the activities they do with the kids is the bishop comes out in all of his regalia and talks about it with the kids. And talks about, like, what is a bishop? What does a bishop do? Why do I have this stick? Why do I have a hat? And I think those are things that, the bishop has a role in being the wider church. The bishop has a role in saying, when I confirm you, these hands that are on your head, those hands, there's a chain all the way back to St. Peter, even if we know there's a few gaps there. As far as the image goes, you are being connected to the much larger church, and that is exciting because they have a blessing in that. And that is something that I think as a priest who has worked a lot with kids and youth, I would bring to the role of bishop and probably really enjoy it, because there is nothing more satisfying when you've been with a bunch of angry adults to go be with a bunch of inspiring teenagers. And I know bishops deal with angry adults. And so you need to have those exciting moments of ministry and potential with the young people of our church to kind of keep my faith alive.
Thank you. The last section is on the church and the world. How do you envision providing leadership to congregations and members of the diocese on matters of social justice, including systemic and structural forces that perpetuate injustice? And what relevant experiences do you bring?
So I think, injustice is systemic. And that means that for those of you who know the sort of adaptive leadership model, righting injustice is an adaptive problem that requires adaptive solutions, not technical fixes. It's a sort of a model that I was trained in with the Clergy Leadership Project. And I find it helpful to look at things because adaptive problems are problems that require systemic change. They're not something you can change by having a new policy or a new law or having a single training or making people watch a video. We can't fix injustice by doing those things, though those may be good things to do. There's no reason not to do those things, but we have to know we're not going to root out injustice by doing that. To root out injustice, we're going to have to do much bigger and larger scale things. And we have to do that as a diocese and as citizens. We have to do that as human beings. One thing that I have been a part of in the Diocese of New York that's been really exciting in doing that kind of adaptive work is being on the organizing committee for the New York Episcopal Credit Union. And my friend Winnie Varghese asked me a couple years ago, hey, we want to start a credit union. Will you join? Because we were both from the Diocese of Los Angeles, which was a place where we had a credit union, and we're both in New York now. And we said, okay, yeah, and let's get some people on this, and let's see if we can do this. And as we learned about credit unions, as we learned about banking, I had mainly said yes to Winnie because I will say yes to anything Winnie asks me to do. I learned about the incredible injustice of the banking system. People are regularly excluded from banking. And that happens because of racism and the history of redlining districts. If you look at any redline districts, you'll discover there are no banks there. And so people don't have access to banks. Now think about and there's other obstacles to banking now as well. In order to open an account at Chase, you can do it with, I think, an initial deposit of $50. But then they're going to charge you $15 a month or $30 a month in fees if you don't maintain a minimum balance of $1,500 every single day. Mm-hmm. And so, if you are low income, you do not have access to the banking system. You also don't have access to the banking system if you don't have the right kind of ID, right? Now, it's not a law that you can't open a bank account if you are an undocumented person. But bank policy is that you need to have the right ID. And so they exclude people. And it's not just whether you're undocumented, it's just like, in New York City, we don't drive. I drive. I know that's a qualification for being bishop here. But in general, people don't drive, and so people don't have driver's licenses, right? And so the only documentation you can take to get a bank account in New York is you need to have a driver's license, or a passport, some sort of picture ID. And a lot of people don't have that. Now think about all the things you can't do if you don't have a bank account. Can't save money, right? Can't establish credit history. Can't have, can't buy a plane ticket. Can't buy anything on Amazon. Can't can't pay your bills online. You can't do a lot of the things in the modern economy that you need to be able to do in order to, if you are a hardworking person, step up that ladder. Not only that, if you are unbanked, it's really expensive. The average unbanked person in the United States spends $2,000 a year on banking services, between fees and interest and that. Now, I have a really good job, and I don't have $2,000 a year to spend on banking. And so we have been working to establish the New York Credit Union. I know you have a credit union here, and I'm very curious about it and would love to learn more. We are in the chartering process. We're not through it yet. Interestingly, they encourage credit unions to be created, but it's we're moving at the speed of church. But what a credit union can provide is access to banking for people who are low income and people who don't have the right ID. And in fact, one of the forms of identification that, you have to know your customers as a bank, because, you can't, if somebody who's on Social Security shows up with $10,000 in cash, that's suspicious. You have to know your customers. But one way that your customer can be known to you is that your clergy person can take you there and say, "This is Mrs. Smith. I know her. She's a member of my church." And they can say, "All right, Mrs. Smith, we're going to open you up an account." We can verify people's ID, their identification, and get them access to that system so that they can, save money, step up the ladder. And that would be a big step towards, righting a systemic injustice.
Thank you. We have a couple minutes for the last one. Being aware that this is a deeply divided time in this country, what experiences do you have in peace building, conflict resolution, and creating common ground?
So I think these are, again, I don't have a magic wand. I can't suddenly make everyone get along. In my own self, I think of this in a lot of different ways. I think of this, there's interpersonal conflict. And that's something where, I'm pretty good first at not getting offended by people, and I'm pretty good second at apologizing when I do something wrong. I recently had an experience where I screwed up and someone was really angry at me, and I apologized a lot. And we got to a point where, it's okay now. We've made our peace. We're moving on, because I took responsibility and said, this was me, and I'm sorry, and I won't do it again, and I shouldn't have done it, but I'm sorry. And then there's, facilitating conflict between other people, right? Where you're not the conflict, you're trying to get people to listen to one another. One thing that I found very useful in doing this in my parish and with my vestry is having people use mutual invitation. Because I feel like when people actually hear one another, they have the capacity to put themselves in the other person's shoes. Mutual invitation is when, I am offered the time to share something, and then I invite the next person to share. And while I'm talking, no one else can talk. And then when I invite the next person to share, they get to talk until they're done. And then they get to invite the next person to share. And it's a way of enforcing, that no one can dominate the conversation, and that everyone is heard. And I find that very helpful because sometimes those transformative moments happen when someone stops. And in a normal conversation, someone would jump in to help them, right? Rescue them from the awkwardness of not knowing what to say or crying or something. But it's the next thing that they say that is the gem. It's the next thing that they say that's the gospel. And so that's a process that I've used really for sort of like large group interpersonal. We did that after the election, we do that on our vestry when we deal with big conflict possibility and things. And I would say just in terms of this conflict resolution, and that's part of it, and peace building and creating common ground, we have to encourage compassion for all of those things. When Jesus looks out at crowds it always, or not always, but often says he had compassion on them. And that is really kind of contrasted to they hardened their hearts, right? So we have to encourage our parishioners and our world really to discern, as I approach this issue that is causing conflict, am I having compassion or is my heart being hardened? And if I discover that my heart is being hardened, then I probably need to take a big breath and step back and spend some more time in prayer. But if I find I'm being motivated by compassion, then I probably need to keep working, keep talking, right? Because conflict doesn't always happen between like two people who are wrong. Sometimes conflict happens because someone's right. And if you are on the side of the gospel and speaking up for the gospel, you should not fear the conflict that will come from doing that. And you need to be confident in that, not arrogantly, humbly, but with the sense that Christ is with you in your love for your neighbor and your desire for them to be converted to Christ in the gospel as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Reverend Andrew Walter and his wife Susan. Is that right? Yes. Thank you for being here. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So the first question, in this process of discernment and a call to the Sacred Order of Bishop, what has been most gratifying and enlightening to you? And the second part, do you have a personal spiritual director?
I'm going to begin with the second part of that question. Do I have a personal spiritual director? Yes. Having a spiritual director is essential to my spiritual life. Having someone to meet with about once a month to talk about what I've been encountering in my relationship with God and other people. Hearing another perspective has been invaluable to me and is a core part of my spiritual practices. So yes to that one. In the process of discernment and call to the Sacred Order of Bishop, what has been most gratifying and enlightening to you? The thing that has been most enlightening, not most enlightening, but the most gratifying to me has been meeting people here in the Diocese of Arizona. I've just gotten to know a few members of the transition committee over the last few weeks, but I really got to know the search committee. And first, I think you all need to know that both groups of people have represented and served you so well. But getting to know them has been incredibly gratifying. Relationships have been at the core of the Christian faith ever since Jesus called his first disciples. And relationships are at the heart of my ministry. Relationships are what feed me and sustain me each and every day when I get up to go to church. Knowing my parishioners. Being a pastor is such an incredible blessing. People open their hearts and their lives to you. Invite you in to their lives at some of the most sensitive, difficult, joyous, and challenging moments. That is a sacred blessing that I cherish. And it is often through other people and their lives that I catch a glimpse of the Holy Spirit and what the Holy Spirit is doing in the world right now through other people. When I came to the discernment retreat with your search committee back at the end of June, we were here for 3 days. My wife Susan and I were here for 3 days. And I can't tell you how spiritually uplifting and prayerful and thoughtful that time was. And I just sort of fell in love with the people on that committee. And some of them are here tonight. And when I was sitting up at the front as we were doing the introductions and then answering our first questions, looking out and seeing those few faces, it just warmed my heart and brought a smile to my face. So that has been the most gratifying. As what has been the most enlightening, I think it's all of the incredible work and ministry that you're doing here. The ways in which you're sharing Christ's love with so many different people. Border ministry, recovery ministry, ministry to children and youth. I mean, the list goes on and on. I was first moved by all the work you were doing when I read the profile. I don't know how many months ago. But when I actually was in the presence of the search committee at that discernment retreat and heard people talk about their ministries with such emotion and passion, it was enlightening. I remember the very first night of that discernment retreat, we had a dinner with the search committee members and the candidates and their spouses. And we were all a little nervous because this was the first time we were all together and we didn't know what to expect. And we had to go around and introduce ourselves and say a little bit of something about who we are. And search committee members went around one by one and they talked about their ministries. And my wife Susan and I were just in awe. And I remember we went back to our hotel room, we closed the door, and we said to each other, this is what the church should be doing. All of this work, this is the church. And in that moment, I knew that I wanted to continue in this discernment process, that I felt such a strong call to come, to live and serve alongside all of you, as possibly the next Bishop of Arizona.
Thank you. The second question in this section is, what is your personal approach to stewardship of time, talent, and treasure?
Stewardship is very important to me for two reasons. First, stewardship is about our relationship with God. All of us have been blessed in so many ways by God. Most especially in God's love made incarnate in Jesus Christ, in the life, death, and resurrection through Jesus Christ. That love has changed all of our lives. I know you people wouldn't be here tonight if you hadn't felt the love of God in Jesus. Because we're loved so deeply by God, we are invited to give back to God. And that's why stewardship is about our relationship with God. It's how we respond to God's love and God's presence in our life. By giving our time, our talent, and our treasure to support God's work in the world. That's one reason. Second reason, because I have experienced the love of God in my life, I am passionate about sharing that love with other people. I have felt God's love change my life in countless ways, making me a better husband, a better father, a better human being. And I want other people to experience that love as well. So, I am not shy about asking people to get involved. At my church, they've heard me say it, the more we do for God, the more we can change the world. The more time you give, the more talent you share, the more we can do for God. And the same goes with for your money, for your treasure. Now, my personal approach to stewardship of time, talent, and treasure. I'm giving my life. I'm giving all that I have to serve God who's loved me. That's what I'm all about. I want to give my life so others can experience what I've experienced. And if called to the Diocese of Arizona as your next bishop, that's what I want all of us to do, is to share the love of God. And Susan and I tithe. We give 10% of our income to support the work of the church, to help share God's love with the world. And you should know that if I am called to be Bishop of Arizona, that we will tithe back to the diocese. Because if the rector or the bishop isn't fully embracing stewardship of time, talent, and treasure, how can we expect others to do it? I believe in leading by example. And so that's something you could expect from me if I'm called here to Arizona.
Thank you. The next section is on the Diocesan Life. What do you see as the primary mission of the Episcopal Church, and how do you imagine leading us into living out that vision in the diocese?
So you have probably heard Presiding Bishop Michael Curry talk about the Jesus movement. Okay? My vision for the Diocese of Arizona is that we will grow the Jesus movement. That we will share the love of God in Jesus with more and more people. You'll notice that I didn't say grow the church. Because when we talk about growing the church, I get a very sort of institutional sense that all we're trying to do is get people in our pews, get people to pledge a little bit more money so that we can keep the doors open and the lights on. I want to grow the Jesus movement. I believe if we can go out into our communities and share the love of God, that people will respond and come to our church. I've seen that at my own parish. But at the same time, we're going out into the communities, we're sharing the love of God with people in the community and changing their lives. So, if I'm called, that would be my vision. Grow the Jesus movement. Now, my first priority as bishop, though, would be to get to know everyone, to build relationships. As I said, that's core to my ministry and who I am and what feeds me and sustains me. So I would spend time, and it would take time, getting to know the clergy and lay leaders of the diocese. But then we would focus on this vision of growing the Jesus movement and how we would go about doing that.
Thank you. The next question. Every congregation wants to grow in numbers and spiritual depth, and all want more children and youth. What role does the bishop have in supporting those aspirations?
I believe the bishop has a huge role in supporting those aspirations by lifting them up as priorities, by saying these things are important. Growing in spiritual depth. I want to talk about that a little bit. The best way to grow in spiritual depth, the best way to deepen our spiritual lives and our connection with God is to engage with Scripture by reading the Bible. And studies have shown that churches that engage with Scripture on a regular basis are the most healthy, thriving, and growing congregations. Several years ago at my church, we had what we called the Year of the Bible. And we invited parishioners to join with me in reading the Bible from September through June. Now, we didn't read the whole Bible, but each and every day we had assigned readings. And over the course of those 9 months, we read a huge chunk of the Bible. Most importantly, giving parishioners an opportunity to get a sense of the overarching biblical narrative, the overarching story of God's love. And I can't tell you how my parishioners grew in their relationship with God by reading the Bible each and every day. So one thing I would like to do here in the Diocese of Arizona, if I was called as bishop, is to uphold us, all of us, engaging with Scripture. Having diocesan meetings begin with some meditation on a passage. Suggesting to vestries that vestry meetings begin by meditating on some Scripture passage. If all of us would be willing to commit to engaging with Scripture on a daily basis or a regular basis, we would grow in spiritual depth. And I believe that our congregations would grow. Children and youth, I think, were also in there. Jesus loved children more than anything. And I think the same would probably be true about youth as well. And I love having relationships with children and youth in our parish. Children and youth are the future. It is incumbent upon us to share our faith with them, to let them know that Jesus loves them, just like in the song. So I think it's important for the bishop to hold that up as a priority and an aspiration. And I think there are several ways that a bishop can do that. A bishop can do that by giving voice to that aspiration, by stating loudly and clearly that children and youth are a priority for all of us. A bishop can also embody that ideal and that aspiration by paying attention to the children and youth around the diocese. One of the things I would most look forward to as Bishop of Arizona would be doing parish visitations. Honestly, I was a little upset when Jennifer got that question. I was like, darn, I have an answer for that one. Maybe next time. Tape it to the bottom where I can pull it off. That would be probably the thing I would look forward to the most, is visiting parishes on Sundays, making those visitations, because again, that's when a bishop really gets to connect with the people of the diocese, which is what I want to do. When I do that, if your parish has children and youth, I want to spend time with them. I want to meet them and hear what they're doing. I want to show them all of my bishop's stuff and talk about it. Susan will tell you that at our church, I'm high-fiving the kids all of the time. How was church today? Did you have fun? That's great. So a bishop can embody that aspiration of embracing the children and youth in our parish. And then a bishop could also highlight all of the great work that's being done around the diocese with children and youth. We spent last night up at Chapel Rock. And today we learned all about the work being done there, the different camps that are run. I know that the current bishop goes out to that camps. You can bet that I'm going to camp. And not only am I going to be there, but there's like a basketball court and stuff where I can play with the kids. Susan will tell you, I'm all over stuff like that. So highlighting some of the great work that's already being done here in the diocese with children and youth. A bishop can give voice to that, raise it up, and celebrate it.
2 more questions. The church and the world. How do you envision providing leadership to congregations and members of the diocese on matters of social justice, including systemic and structural forces that perpetuate injustice? And what relevant experiences do you bring?
As baptized Christians, we have promised to strive for justice. respecting the dignity of every human being. And what does the Lord require? But that you do justice. So, we have no choice. We have to work for justice, work for a better world, for us, for our children. God calls us to this work. So I would be committed to that kind of justice work if I was called here as bishop. What I would want to do is to learn over those first few years, when I'm getting to know all of you, is to learn what are the 2 or 3 justice issues that are really important here in Arizona. And I say that because over the last few months, as I've been going through this discernment process, I have been meeting with my bishop back home. And one piece of advice she gave me was, you have to be very thoughtful about when you speak out. And really what you should do is pick 2 or 3 issues that are important to you and to your people. And choose those, and those would be the issues to address. Because if you speak out more than that, your voice gets diluted. And I think I would take that advice to heart. I respect my bishop very much, and she's really followed through with her own advice and the way she conducts her ministry. So I think speaking out on a few issues of injustice. Also, embodying that baptismal promise to strive for justice. One of the most important things a bishop can do is to show up for stuff, to be present, to stand alongside all of you when you're standing up for justice. And I would commit to doing that. As for what sort of experience I bring to matters of injustice, I lead a very diverse congregation. Our congregation is about 60% Anglo-white, about 35% black. And by that I mean African American, Afro-Caribbean, and West African. And then about 5% Asian and Hispanic. And I remember on my very first Sunday at this parish, I had preached at the 8 o'clock service. We were downstairs in our undercroft, sort of our church basement, for an adult forum, an opportunity for parishioners to meet the new rector. And we were sitting there at the tables. I can still see it in my mind. And an older parishioner, a gentleman who had been at the parish for quite a long time, person of color, raised his hand and said, "What experience do you have ministering to people who look like me?" And I sort of went, hubbada, hubbada, hubbada. Not a lot. Almost none. But over the last 8 years, I've walked with all of my parishioners, including the people of color, and I have learned and grown in ways I couldn't possibly imagine. I've learned about the struggles that they have faced in their lives, the ways in which the structural injustices of our society are built into our institutions and organizations and keep them from living the full life that God intends for them. And over time, I began to discern a sense that our parish needed to do something about racial injustice. I could hear God's voice. At around that same time, there were a lot of shootings, police officers killing young men of color in the news. And several parishioners came forward and said, "Andrew, we need to do something. We need to speak up or show up, but we can't let this continue." And so these two things came together for me around the same time, this discernment I had been going through, in the sense that God was calling us to get involved, and these parishioners coming forward saying, we need to do something. And I realized that as a diverse congregation, people of different racial backgrounds, that we had an opportunity to be a unifying voice for racial justice. People of different races coming together to say, no, this is not right. This is not what God intends for the world God created. And so we began our racial justice ministry. And we developed a 5-year plan to become the church and faith-based institution in our community known for racial justice work. We spent the first year and a half talking amongst ourselves, because we believed that in order to go out into the community to do this work, we needed to get right on the inside with our own unconscious bias that we all carry, no matter how generously spirited we are. And so for 18 months, we would bring parishioners together in small groups. We would talk about our experiences of race and racism. And it was such a powerful thing for us to do. And people of all the different backgrounds learned by listening to each other. And now we're moving on to the next step, which is taking this work out into the community, partnering with other churches that are already doing this work and other organizations to find a way that we could interrupt the structural racism that exists in our society.
Thank you. In many ways, you've answered the last question, but we're going to give it to you anyway. Being aware that this is a deeply divided time in this country, what experiences do you have in peace building and conflict resolution and creating common ground?
When I first came to my church 8 years ago, the parish was deeply divided because the previous rector had made some administrative mistakes, decisions that people within the parish didn't really like. And in addition, the church had held a capital campaign, raised all of this money, and then decided to use the money for other things besides what they said they were going to use it for. That would upset you too? Note to self. People were angry. Angry. Divided. Things were so bad, people wouldn't share the peace with each other. And that's the truth. The interim rector did a great job beginning to heal some of these rifts and these hurt feelings. But there was still stuff there when I arrived. Stuff that needed to be dealt with. We still needed to do another capital campaign. Well, we couldn't start that capital campaign, right? Until we went back and addressed all of the feelings from the previous capital campaign. And so I spent 2 years meeting with people, talking with people, listening to their stories, their hurt feelings, their anger, allowing them to give voice to all of that emotion, and just taking it in, apologizing, sitting with them. And that really started to bring us together, started to bring people together. And then we had this vision. We needed a vision of the kind of people that we wanted to be, the kind of church community that we wanted to be known as. And we have this vision to be that city on a hill where people of all races and cultures can come to build their relationships with God and others. And that vision has been our guide for 8 years. That vision is who we aspire to be and the kind of people we're still trying to work towards becoming. And it's made such a huge difference. Our parish is thriving. People love being part of our parish, and all of that stuff is a distant memory. And we're just focused on growing the Jesus movement.
Thank you.